Okay, what we're going to be talking about today is high-performance coaching and programming in this era of big data. And one of the things that I want to say is that this is just a piece of the puzzle. There's been a lot of interest on wearables and metrics for measuring performance and things like that. But I think you have to remember you need to get the basics down first. The basics are good coaching, good lifting, okay, good practices, things like that, building good rapport, getting basic nutrition in, sleep. If you're not doing those things, then all of this other stuff that we're going to talk about today is not going to get you there, okay? So we always say master the basics, think outside the box, but don't forget about what's inside the box, okay? Don't go chase that 5% at the expense of the 95% you already have. This is sort of our mantra that we have right here when we're dealing with our athletes. We're forged on a foundation of science, technology, but most of all, trust, okay? We're developing individual performance and regen programs that give us rise to a high-performance culture for more resilient, stronger, and relentless athletes. By this, I mean, we go back to talking about the basics. Doesn't matter what level you're coaching at or training at, if you don't have the trust of your athletes, nothing else can be based on it, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we want to develop a culture of training within our organization that allows those athletes to trust us. We have a continuum of development, and by this I mean what we do once we draft a player is we build the same building blocks and give them the same things that they have access to at our level at the draft level, okay? So it's not like all of a sudden the player ends up getting to the NHL and it's like, wow, you're using these supplements and you have a force plate and we're changing our workouts around and you're monitoring me. We try and do all of those things right from the get-go, okay? And I think that's the most important thing is putting that system in place right from the beginning. What kinds of things are we measuring? Well, if you look at our sport is a lot different than a lot of the other main sports that are out there, okay? So obviously we're a very explosive sport. We're anaerobic energy system. We're stop and go. Guys get out on the ice. They'll skate for a few seconds. They'll get off. Very explosive. It's a very skilled sport in that we're on skates, sticking puck, got to shoot in the net, and at the same time you're worried about somebody bearing down on you. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are occurring. They're different positions, so goalie training is going to be slightly different than forwards and so on. We have high contact, and not just high contact in the way, say, football or rugby is where we're on the ground. These guys can get speed up and then coast into you and hit you, and also you have a more immovable object on one side like a board or something. So there's a lot of G-force that these guys are subjected to as well, which wears them down. The other thing, of course, that we all deal with, and it doesn't matter about what level you're at, is travel, okay? So even when you look at the minor hockey league level, I've got 4 kids, 3 of them right now are in minor hockey, and you're traveling to tournaments, you're playing compressed games, then you got to travel somewhere else and these kinds of things. So even at the minor hockey league level, you're exposed to travel. We're exposed to travel in a way in which, of course, we're traveling time zones, right? We'll play here, Calgary, cut across, play Columbus, maybe Colorado, come home, these kinds of things. So it's the same type of idea. So those are all things that we want to try and measure that are going to affect performance. The basic things you're trying to look at are sort of a two-pronged approach in which you're looking at fatigue and recovery, and you're looking at training and adaptation. So fatigue and recovery, of course, you're looking at, okay, what happened, okay? How are the guys, are they ready to play or are they not ready to play, okay? And then if you're looking at it from a training standpoint, you're looking at what do the guys need to do in order to prepare them for that next bout, okay? And how are we doing this? Well, Eric is going to talk a lot about our force plate and how we use this particular technology to program our workout plan, as well as to take a look at fatigue, and also to take a look at injury prediction. okay? So we're using this force plate. We try and use it a minimum of once a month. And like I was saying before, we use it even in our American League system as well. So the system is the same and continuous all the way through our program. We also have a development strength coach, Brian Marshall, who's in the GTA, the Toronto area, and all of our prospects end up using it there as well. So we've got a good beat on our players all the way through their careers. Internal load, what we're doing is, one of the things I think I forgot to mention was that our process is developing. It's a live process. So that means that what we're doing today will actually develop more. So in a couple of months when you talk to us, this system isn't going to be exactly the same, okay? So what we're doing for measuring our internal workload is what we call TRIMP, okay? And Eric's heard me say this before, but I was giving a talk to my 11-year-old's class on health and fitness. And I asked him, I said, so what kind of tips can you give me for talking? He goes, Dad, less sciencey, more Englishy. So that's the motto I'm going with here. All you have to know, TRIMP is just workload, okay? So we measure workload by putting heart rate straps on guys, and from the heart rate strap, we'll get a specific workload out of what the practice was. Now with the CBA, we're not allowed to measure in-game data, but there are so many uncontrollable factors within a game as well that we want to try and control what we can control and monitor what we know is going to be constant. And those kinds of things are practice plans, which I'll get into in a minute. The other thing that we do is we measure individual characteristics. So we measure a wellness scale, an RPE, which is basically a way of finding out how sore the guys are, how much sleep quality they've had, okay? And items like that, which I'm going to get into in a minute here. So from measuring all this stuff, like a lot of guys will be like, okay, so you measure all this stuff, what are you trying to get out of it? Well, from it, we're going to get individual results. So we'll see individual players, how they recover, how they sleep, how sore they are, these kinds of things. We'll see how hard that specific workload was, if it's dropping out on them, and how they react to it. But almost more important to that is taking a look at team average data, okay? So from that, we can get an idea of how the team is reacting to things like travel or back-to-back games, see how a workload was a couple of days ago and how that affects our win-losses. Okay, so as a team, that's important. Eventually, we'll get into measuring things like positions, so we can take a look at how the D-men react to certain practices and items like that. So when we're measuring stuff, to be honest, like the things that we measure, we need to manage. We need to do something with them. So there are a lot of, especially in a lot of other sports like soccer and things, they measure like everything, you know, from how many blades of grass there are to the humidity out there and these kinds of items. But we need to be able to do something about it. It's not just collecting the data and saying, hey, wow, look at how fast that guy skated. That's great, and then not look at it again. Okay, we need to be able to do something with it, so they have to be relevant. The other thing is they need to be measurable, and by measurable I mean objective. It's not just like saying and watching a player skate and going, oh yeah, he needs more foot speed. Okay, so what do you mean by foot speed? Okay, does that mean that the guy taking off from the line initially, he needs that initial jump, the first 2 or 3 steps? Is it that in the middle he needs to be faster as he accelerates? Or at the end, is it that he can't get top end speed and then slow down and turn around or cut? So what part of fast is this guy, or what part of slow is this guy? What do you mean by foot speed? It's a great catchphrase, but it's not objective, okay? So in a combination of what Eric's doing with the force plate and measuring first, second, and third gear from that plate and adding it to our on-ice testing, if we have a 35-meter sprint, we can do lap times. So we can do split times, I should say. So in the first 10 meters, how fast is this guy? From 10 meters to 20, from 20 to 35, from 0 to 35 meters, like where is this guy slow? So you may have a player that's really quick off the line, or 2 players go, one guy's fast off the line, so he beats the first guy, but then once they get going, this other guy catches up to him and actually beats him at the end. So objectively, who's faster, okay? So with this data, we can marry them together and we can tell exactly what area we want to work on. The other thing, if you guys are working with a budget and you think, okay, I'm going to implement one of these pieces of technology, you have to remember they have to be non-distracting to the player. So it can't be a situation where a player goes in, you're going to take blood from him, or you're going to hook this thing up to his helmet, then he's got to go and put these special shorts on with these little gizmos and this and that and the other thing. As soon as you start adding a whole bunch of things like that, players are like, I'm out, I'm done. I got to call the CBA or the NHLPA or something and get this rectified. It has to be not distracting to the player. And the other thing, as I talked about, is it needs to be actionable. You need to be able to do something with it. For us, a lot of it is for our programming to find out how we're going to deal with each player and make them perform better. But as a player, they want to wear this thing and they want to come off the ice and say, okay, what is this thing showing me? How is it going to prevent injury? How is it going to make me faster? These kinds of things. So you have to be able to have it actionable for the player immediately, okay? And that's all part of buy-in and getting that culture going and that trust. So TRIMP here, I talked a little bit about before. That's just our workload. It's guys put on a heart rate strap. They go out for practice. They're all sitting in their stalls. Again, we want to make this as easy as possible for the player, okay? So what we do is we throw it on their stalls in the morning. It's just as they're getting changed, they throw it on. They go wheel around. They come off the ice and they leave it on the stall. That's it, just like hanging their gear up. We go around, we collect them, we download them, we wash them, we dry them. So the player has very minimal part of actually taking care of this. So where we're going with this is that we want to get, our next process is getting a script from the coaches, so a practice plan essentially. So what will happen is the coaches will have, say, 5 drills out, and they'll rate those drills out of 5, 5 being the most difficult, 1 being easy. And what we're gonna do is we will mark those drills as the drills are going on, and we'll be able to tell the coach how much workload is associated with each drill. So a coach may think that's a 5 out of 5 drill. We measure it, it's actually a 3 out of 5 drill. Conversely, you may have a drill where the coach thinks, oh, that's 2, and actually it was a 4, okay? So how does this affect training plans? Well, what happens then is you can come to a coach and you can say you have $25 to spend on this next practice, okay? So you can spend it any way you want. You want to spend 5 out of 5 drills, go ahead, or whatever, okay? And we're not dictating to the coach how to set up their practice plan. We're just giving them information. All of this stuff, all it does is add context to what you already have as a coach, okay? And I'll talk about the RPEs and stuff like that, the wellness stuff. Even if it shows the players are all fatigued this day, it's the coach's prerogative to use their coach's intuition. If they say, hey, Monday, I don't really care what the data says, I'm gonna beg the crap out of these guys because mentally this is what they need now, that's their decision. Again, we just provide data for them to make their decision. So, with that script, what we can do also is as a coach, sometimes coaches think, oh, that drill is fairly easy. It's a 2 out of 5 type drill. But then when we break it down to position, the D-men were actually getting hammered. It was a 5 out of 5 drill for the D, and it was a 2 out of 5 drill for the forwards. So we have to be cognizant of that, of how we're going to play that in the next couple of games, right? So as a say a junior hockey coach and you notice that's going to happen, well then, and what would happen if all of a sudden you're down to a couple of D got injured in that next game? Now you had a high workload on these D the day before, and now you're playing short, right? So you have to look at what could possibly happen. So what we're getting out of this is we're getting data from the game day skate, the practices, and then seeing how that affects our outcome. So if we have a team average of workload, okay, so we measure the guys in the practice, and then we see how that affects our game. So if we have a TRIMP load or workload up here, typically what's happened is that we have a poor outcome the next night. So we would have a game where we come out flat, or a game where we would lose or be struggling. If that workload is slightly lower, and there's usually a kind of a fine line there, if it's slightly lower, then usually the outcome is a lot better, okay? So that just gives some information to the coaches on that aspect. Same thing with game day skates. If we have a game day skate that the workload is really high, okay, then you have to remember a few hours later we're playing, a lot of times what would happen is we'd have a poor outcome on the other end, okay? So that's just information for the coaches that they can make their decisions on. The other thing that we do besides measuring with this heart rate strap is we have what we call a wellness app or a readiness questionnaire. And this is probably the easiest thing for minor hockey coaches to put in place. And all it is an objective way of measuring the old, hey, how are you doing? That's what it is, okay? So ours is on an app that the guys would fill out. It's a scale. They just slide the scale along. And there's essentially just 3 questions on there. How fatigued they feel, how their sleep quality was, and how sore they are. So typically what we see is when fatigue goes up, soreness goes up, and sleep quality is down, okay? And people will say, well, that's pretty obvious. But if I asked you, how was that player a month ago? Or how is this player trending? Are they getting worse? Or are they getting better? You probably wouldn't remember. And that's why it's good to have it on a piece of paper. And for an easy way to do it is just have a 1 to 10 scale for each one of these things, and the guy comes in and just marks down 4, 5, 1, and you just collect these things after time so you can see a trend of where guys are starting to go. Or is the whole team getting more fatigued, or are they getting less fatigued? How does travel affect these guys? So I know that when I go to the prairies and I play these guys, my guys are always not very good by the 3rd day. Okay, so what am I gonna do now to make that actionable? How am I gonna change that, okay? For our scale, we don't have any numbers on it because that takes away the guy looking, peeking out, what are you? I'm a 5, oh, I'm better than you, I'm a 6, or what was I yesterday? We just have a sliding scale on ours. And the guy just pushes submit and away it goes. But that's a really good way of measuring overall fatigue for a team and readiness. So from this, we can take a look at how guys are affected on a day-to-day basis. And if we measure it in the morning, say for example, you guys are playing and in the morning you notice one of the players is really down, is he gonna have a bad game? No, okay? That's the time when things can become actionable. Now you can take a part in getting this player better. So if you have one of your star players, your key players, and he's not rating very high, he's really fatigued, he's sore, he didn't sleep very well the night before. Okay, so now you got to get on him for a game day nap, watch his nutrition, watch his hydration better. Is he going to need some kind of supplementation, like all these kinds of things? He will probably need a better kind of warm-up, like what we call a neurological warm-up, which is more hopping, skipping, jumping, explosive type work, prior to him getting on the ice. So those are ways where you can identify the player. It's a way to open the door to communication, and when you talk about communication, that's a way to gain the player's trust again, okay? So if you didn't have that system, they may not say anything to you and just think, oh, he's a little bit tired, but he'll be okay. And you don't affect his play now. So you didn't do any of those factors when you had the time to change him around, okay? So all of the monitoring, essentially it works all together, and it's a starting point for conversation and context. It's not gonna tell you why that a player is tired, or it's not going to show you why his workload is so high or why he's not performing properly. That's up to you as coaches to peel away that layer of the onion and look, okay, why is this guy tired, or why is he not performing, okay? I think the big idea with these things is to see a trend over time. So it's not a situation where all of a sudden the guy's not playing well these couple games, you go, oh, I got to do something about it. If you had followed his data from 2 weeks ago, you would notice that he's starting to tank out like this. It wasn't until he got to here, 7 or 8 days later, that performance actually was affected on a game-to-game basis. Up here is where he started to notice the deficit starting to drop. And that's what this kind of stuff is good for. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric now, and he's going to talk a little bit about our force plate testing, which actually forms a lot of how we do our programs and how we look at injury recovery, okay?
All right, so I have a funny story. So when I first came to the Känakс, I worked with the Sharks before I got here, and one of the things that everyone in the NHL knew about the Känaks was that they had a lot of resources, and they had a lot of stuff that they used, the technology, and they were big into monitoring. And so when I got here, I was like, oh man, you guys have a ton of things, and this is crazy. You guys have all these things, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that they were doing with all that stuff. So, you know, Raj said, well, what do you think, and you know, what can we do with this stuff? So there was one in our gym. There was this big kind of, you know, thing that took up almost half the gym, and it was this screen, and you know, there was these balls on the screen, and guys would like have to track it and remember which ones were where, and we had, you know, one guy that used it, and I said, hey, Raj, what do you think about let's gas this thing and get rid of it, and then we can actually use this for working out. So yeah, sure, good idea. So morning skates there, guys in there doing the bubbles, and you know, and then we get rid of it in the afternoon, and then the, you know, guys come in for the warm up. The one guy that uses this thing standing in the space and says, what used to be here? And I was like, oh, well, that was a great idea then, because the one guy that used this thing didn't remember what was actually there when it was gone. So, you know, it ties into kind of, you know, one of my favorite quotes, which is, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And so because we live in this era of big data and there's all these analytics that go on, there's so many things you can be doing from the minor hockey level all the way up to the NHL level. And so one of, you know, the things that Raj kind of tasked me with when I came to the Känakс was, you know, let's find the things that work. Let's take the one or two things that really work and apply it to making these guys better physically. So, you know, and what we do with our athletes, and Raj touched on this earlier, is we try to build this culture of trust with our athletes. And part of building that culture of trust is you know, having transparency in what we do. So what I mean by transparency is the fact that we measure a few different things. We measure heart rate. We measure, what I'll talk about is with the force plate. But our athletes have access to that data at the very moment that we measure that. So the reason we do that is because we want our athletes to trust that what we're doing is going to make them better. But we also have to give trust to the athletes to gain that trust. So when we talk to them about what we're measuring, if it's a force plate jump or if it's their heart rate on ice, we want them to know why we're measuring things and what the values are that we're taking in, because that gives them transparency into what we're doing, and it holds us accountable as coaches. A lot of times when we go through our program, you know, we tell a guy, okay, if you do this movement, this is going to be an outcome, right? You're going to get faster. You're going to get quicker off the line. But sometimes our athletes don't get better right away. They get worse. And you know, a lot of, like I tell our guys a lot of times, I'm right 90% of the time every time. But sometimes I'm wrong. So, you know, as a coach, we have to have some vulnerability there as to tell our guys, well, yeah, I think this is why you didn't get better, and let's, you know, we got to work through this path. But, you know, having that vulnerability and that transparency in what we're doing is key for us to get that buy-in, especially with, you know, guys that come in and they may have played in college and they had a strength coach that had them doing these things, guys, you know, and then we get the other side of the spectrum where guys, you know, may have played major, junior, or minor hockey and didn't necessarily have that structured strength and conditioning background. So for us, we have to really build that trust with our athletes, and you know, having that transparency is key. What we measure is the counter movement jump, all right? So the counter movement jump, really simple. We have this thing that looks like a big bathroom scale. It's called a force plate, and it measures all these different forces that the athletes produce. It measures the direction in which they produce them. It measures how much they produce and how fast they produce it. So basically, you know, what we talk to our guys about is, you know, what we're looking at are three things. We call them gears. We look at first gear, right? And, you know, when we look at all this raw data, we have to have a framework for our athletes to understand it. If we just talked about, you know, rate of eccentric force, our guys were like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So we had to come up with a framework for our guys to understand the data. Not only do we want them to know it, we just want them to be able to comprehend it and say, this is going to help me in hockey, right? So we said, okay, let's think about this. Most of our guys understand what it means to have first, second, and third gear in their car. So first gear is basically what we talk to our guys about is their first step quickness, right? Their ability to be quick and stiff off the line. All right, that makes sense. So the next thing was, okay, we want to see how explosive these guys are, how much force they're producing. So we called that second gear. And what that ties in with is the ability to be explosive and to accelerate once they've started that initiation of their movement, right? So we see a lot of times these guys that have these real short strides. They look quick, but they're actually not very fast. So, you know, and then we see those guys that have those really long, powerful, explosive strides, but they don't look quick. But those are actually the guys that are more explosive and more able to get to that top end speed. So we came up with that second gear term. And then our third gear, you know, it's a really complex mechanical concept. So instead of, you know, calling it two different things, which is really your top end speed, but also your brakes, we just call it third gear. Our guys are better at just knowing one thing. So when we talk to them about it, it's like, okay, well, you see those guys that have those real long, powerful strides, they're imparting a huge amount of force into the ice, but they're doing that for a long period of time. So they're able to gain top end speed because they're putting a lot of force, so they're pushing that gas pedal down for longer with more intensity, basically. So guys are like, oh, that's, you know, I understand that, that's good. Okay, so, you know, what do I need to work on? So the way we measure this is through a counter movement jump. We have this big bathroom scale. These guys stand on it. They start with their arms up, and when we say go, they jump, right? When they jump, we don't give them any instruction on how we want them to jump. We don't say load or pause here or load quickly and take off smoothly. We just say jump. The reason we do that is because when we see those guys that are really choppy and short, and we see those guys that are really long, that tendency for movement is going to show up in their counter movement jump. And the reason we do the counter movement jump is because a novice athlete can master the counter movement jump. They can jump. Unless they have some sort of injury preventing them from jumping, every athlete can jump. So it's a simple primal movement that young athletes can do and elite athletes can do. So we use that because that's going to give us insight into what their needs are going to be. So I'll give you guys an example here. So what we get from that counter movement jump is what we call a performance profile or a movement signature, right? Each athlete has their own movement signature. So when we give them their data or we give them the explanation as to what they need, we had, like I said, we came up with this framework, right? The raw data wasn't going to make sense. So we looked at that, giving them a visual or a graphical image of what they need. So we look at the performance profile. It's made up of 3 gears. So that first gear, that's their quickness or that first step, right? And it's a very simplified explanation, but it's understandable. That second gear is that acceleration or that ability to have a stiff trunk, ability to hold their platforms well. And then that third gear is their top end speed, but more importantly, it's their ability to be smooth and decelerate well. So we see a big correlation with that third gear and guys that are really good at changing direction smoothly and accelerating out of those changes of direction. So the framework is built so that the athletes can see it visually and they don't need to really think about what they're looking at. They see one gear higher than the other, and we talk about how that profile or that signature matches certain positions or tendencies for elite guys that look a certain way. Again, that graphical representation, there's 3 different common healthy profiles or signatures. So that first profile, I have them flipped up. I made a mistake there. So that first profile there that we're looking at, that low first, slightly higher second, and then that high third, that's what we call a linear profile. I know it says lateral, but what we look at with that is it's a guy that doesn't need as much first step quickness, but they need a lot of acceleration and top end speed. And we see a lot of that with our top wing players, right? Their ability to gain speed as they're moving rather than being quick in a short area. So when we tested, we have thousands and thousands of trials on athletes ranging from NCAA level, major junior, all the way up through NHL. And we see the common trend for wing players is to have this, what we call a linear profile, that ability to accelerate as they're going. So when we get a new athlete or we draft a player, we can look at what their movement signature is, and we can either keep what they're doing or we can change what they're doing to make them look more like an elite wing player if that's what their position, if that's what their position needs. Their second, that second profile there is what we call a rotational profile. So we look at the ability to put force into the ice quickly, relax through their movement, and then decelerate smoothly and explosively to change directions. We see this commonly with our elite centers and our goalies, right? And when we talk to our goalies especially, they understand what that means. They put force into the ice. They have to cover the distance across the crease. They have to be able to smoothly do that, but then put the brakes on right away and then stop, either change directions or hold that position. So we see this commonality through all of our elite goalies. And then our lateral profile, which is the third image there, is what we see with a lot of our D-men. They need to be quick, and they need to be changing directions very quickly in a short space, and they stay in what we call flexion, right? They don't get into that top end speed a lot of times because they're not getting out of that flex position because they're back skating, they're staying in a smaller space. So we call that a lateral profile. They're very good at being quick and changing directions laterally. And so when we looked at all of our D-men, all these guys that were the best D-men that we've ever tested all had this lateral profile. So this is how we look at what we do for our programming. So the other thing that's really important for us is looking at performance, obviously. We want to see what we can do to affect performance. How can we make this guy better? How can we make this guy faster? How can we make this guy stronger and more durable? And one of the things that we look at is what type of injuries are associated with a certain type of movement that our athletes might have. So when we see a discrepancy in their movement, a guy might be really quick, right? He might be very explosive, but he's very unable to load smoothly or change direction smoothly. And that tendency for inefficiency, we call it, is what causes potential injuries. So when a guy has a high amount of force production, they're putting a high amount of force into the ice, but their muscle may not be loading properly or able to handle that force. So we see a potential gap for injury. So, when I started doing this 7 or 8 years ago, we wanted to obviously affect performance and say, okay, maybe we should have, all 3 gears be as high as they can. Yeah, well, that was for performance. But then what we thought about too was, when we looked at the different signatures of the different athletes we tested, we said, okay, what about what types of injuries these guys had? And I think you would all agree that if you have an athlete that's injured, he's obviously not helping the team. So, it's one thing to want to improve their performance. It's another thing to actually have them on the ice participating with the team and in games. So for us, the biggest thing is improving that resiliency in our athletes and making them durable. So when we tested all of these guys, we said these guys that all had this really high third gear and this low first gear all had this injury. All these guys that had the opposite had this injury. So what we started doing was creating a database of what profiles or signatures match certain types of injuries so that we can associate potential signs and potential injury risk factors for these athletes and then improve that gap and then also improve their performance at the same time. When I worked with the Sharks, I talked to these guys. There was a lot of veteran athletes there. And so, I talked to them about, we had the guys that come up, we have the rookie players, they're fresh, we're adding horsepower to these guys, they have these big engines and all they want to do is go. Then we have these veteran players, these guys that have been in the league for a while, and they still want to get stronger, but they're kind of okay with maintaining. And then we have these high mileage guys, right, like Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau have been in the league for years, and they want to add horsepower, but they don't think about the fact that you have to maintain their engine. So, we talked to these guys about, two things like, well, when this gear doesn't go up, this is why, and sometimes we want to see this gear come down, and they don't understand that. Like, you might want to see something come down while the other one goes up, and it's not going to necessarily change their performance, but it's going to make them more resilient. And I think a big thing when talking with young athletes is the reason some of these guys, Henrik and Daniel, Joe and Patty, these guys have been in the league for a long time. They've had long, very successful careers. Part of it's luck, but a big part of it is that these guys all take care of themselves off the ice. And I think that's the message. If you walk away with anything today from this is, the taking care of yourself, the nutrition, the regeneration, sleeping, the off-ice stuff, the training, that's all going to be a big contribution to success at a high level. And, again, skill and luck are big, but, the reason these top-end players have had long, successful careers is because they do the things that they need to do to take care of themselves or maintain their engine. So again, just to talk these weak variables, these profiles show sign for potential injury. So when we see some of the sign in these different profiles, and these guys have this, they all come in with the same commonality. So we have an idea that if this is happening and this is what the profile looks like, we have to make an adjustment or an intervention. And then we have what's called an extreme profile. And these extreme profiles are actual profiles that had an injury associated with them. So, again, we look at certain profiles and we look at what we can do to make those changes or interventions to make the athletes more resilient, but also improve their performance at the same time, right? So as strength coaches, it's our job to get these guys ready. And, like part of that is having them do the things we want them to do, but part of it is also educating the athlete on why they're doing it so that they want to do it. We have a group of guys in now training, and some of them didn't do a lot of preparation before they got to Vancouver, and they're really sore this week. And I talked to a couple of our managers about it, and they're like, well, why didn't these guys prepare for this week? They knew they're coming here to work out. And I said, I know that was a bad decision on their part, but what I will tell you is that we have their buy-in now. And these guys are sore, but the reason they're sore is because they're working hard and they're bought into kind of what we want them to be doing. And so, we're successful now. So that we have these guys, and that's the key is the education. The reason they didn't have or prepare before was because they didn't have that education. A couple of these guys were new to our organization, and they just weren't educated on why they should be training, and now they're getting that. So we have that ability to sell them on, this is going to make you better or more resilient. So again, I just put this up there. So what we do when we have our meetings, our human performance meetings, we talk about our yellow flags and our red flags. And our yellow flags are guys that are kind of guys that we have identified as, this might happen if they keep trending a certain way. And we look at what we call a risk analysis for certain potential injuries, and the sign is what we use. So when a guy he shows up with a tight quad, and his profile looks a certain way, and he's been doing certain things, he might be doing our program, and then he comes and tells us, I ran 6 miles yesterday. I don't know, I felt like I should run 6 miles. Well, that's a terrible idea. So we talked to him about that too, and it's part of it is, a lot of these guys, that's what they've grown up doing, and so in order to be able to run 6 miles, they have to give us a good reason why they want to run 6 miles, and now they know the right answer, but then they also know that running 6 miles is bad, so they figured out after getting the wrong answer every time that they know which one we want to hear, but they also now know that running 6 miles is terrible. So all of that comes down to education. So this is how we use it to educate our athletes. One of the big things for us, and I think this goes for coaching as well on ice, is how do we know what we're doing is working, and how do we know that our prescriptions or our plan is achieving what it should achieve, or how do we know our program is actually efficient? And the way we do that is we use what we call time series data, or a trajectory. And what that means is when we see a person's profile look a certain way and we say, okay, we want third gear to go up, well, we say these movements are going to make third gear go up. And what we did over time was through trial and error, we came up with different ideas. Okay, we thought this movement was best for third gear. Well, that didn't really work, so then we tried this. And there's a lot of trial and error, but now we know that when we say third gear should go up, this exercise makes third gear go up, and we see those profiles change, and we associate that change in profile with our program. And the nice thing is, like Raj mentioned, we have a guy in the GTA. He's got a force plate there, and he measures all of our prospects, and he runs the program with those guys. Our American League team has a force plate, and he measures all of our athletes. So essentially, if one of our coaches says, hey, I've been trying to get third gear up on this guy, I tried this exercise, and it worked really well, then we can use that information. So we have this continuum of information sharing that helps us fine-tune our program, and that's how we know what we're doing is working. And right now, one of the things I'm working on is coming up with sort of a decision tree of testing that you can use in the minor hockey levels, and the junior levels, and in the other teams that don't have the resources to get a force plate, to actually test their athletes with affordable modalities to actually see what gears those athletes might need. So we're coming up with that. We've got a lot of questions about that. So, if you guys have questions on that later, I can probably answer those for you. And then again, here's our red flag guys. So these guys are guys that had a certain profile that actually encountered that injury. And so when we looked at athletes, we looked at guys that had an extreme profile or extreme signature and had that injury at the same time. So we can make those interventions. So I'll get down, just finish up on how we prescribe movements. So we travel a lot, and at home we have a great facility. We have everything we need, and basically what I talk to our guys about is we try to give them everything they need and nothing they don't need. And we have that in Vancouver, but when we go to other rinks, we don't necessarily have that. So what we try to do with all of our movements and all of our exercises is come up with objective movements so we can measure like a weight, right? Everybody can squat. We can use that number that they do to increase that or decrease that based on what their needs are. you know, it has to be scalable. We have to be able to adjust that and be able to make that movement better or worse based off of what they need. And then we have to be able to have it be universal. So all of our movements that we do in Vancouver, we can do on the road. And the reason we've done that is because we don't want to have a gap in performance training, especially with our athletes that aren't playing. So our healthy scratch guys, they work out a lot, and they need to continue to do that because they're not getting the stimulus from a game. So when we go on the road, all of our movements that we do at home are able to be done on the road, and that's key for us to keep that continuum of improvement happening. So for us, it's like I said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I know a force plate seems like it's out of reach for a lot of people, but really what we come down to is trust, education, and picking movements that get the biggest bang for their buck. And those movements they're not movements that we came up with. They've been in existence for years. There's a lot of strength coaches that are doing them. We just find that when we do these exercises, the athletes understand why they're doing it, so we get the results we need. And that comes down to obviously the trust and the education and the buy-in, and all of that comes back down to transparency, why we're doing the things we do, and you know, again, holding ourselves accountable as coaches, and being able to answer questions, and even the hard questions, why the guy didn't get better. And those are key for us. So hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll be around for questions.